What is up, everyone? Happy New Year. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to dive into the month of January, and I want to give you guys a little bit, one of my New Year's resolutions, I want to say, was probably just more so giving more to you all. So I want to give more of an in-depth look of what is going on, and so we're going to start that with the top baits of the month here in the month of January. Now, January, for some of you, it's it's gotten pretty cold down here in the southeast where I'm from right now. I know it's cold for a lot of my friends up in the northern parts of the country. You got some ice on your bodies of water, but fishing is still sort of going down. To sort of give us like a little bit of an understanding of what's transpired to this point, we've had a lot less rain this year, it seems like, across the country than most years. Now that being said, that means that the water clarity is a lot cleaner on a lot of these lakes, and that's where my bait selection is going to sort of, for right now. Now the rain's going to come. Eventually it is going to come, and that spring rains will ultimately make that water come up, make the water more stained, and it will change some of the techniques that I might be using moving forward in maybe later January and into February. So jumping into the first selection of the baits that I'm going to be throwing here in the month of January, I'm gonna see here. Number one, for all of my friends that don't know what this guy right here is, it's a blade, and it is basically a blade bait. This is a new, I believe it's called a ripping blade. Let me see, I'll tell you for sure. So I've used this like probably the last 3 weeks or so, and it just came out. Basically what this is like a silver buddy, or this is a ripping blade right here, or a blade bait. And so some of my friends have asked me, like, how do you throw a blade bait? All right, simple as this. For me, ultimately, I'm gonna cast it out there, and it's gonna be really good. It's gonna be a lift. It's a yo-yoing technique. I don't really use this, even though it looks like a lipless crankbait. I use this more for more of that yo-yoing, yo-yoing that bait, letting it hit the bottom, yo-yo that bait, let it hit the bottom. So I'll show you just for instance. I'll pitch it out there, or cast it out there, let it hit the bottom. I'll pull it up with my rod, I'll feel that vibration, let it hit the bottom, pull it up, let it hit the bottom. Not big hops for me. This time of year when the water's really, really cold, a lot of times the fish get pretty fickle. And when they're cold, like they lay on the bottom. I hear a lot of people say in the wintertime fish suspend. They do suspend sometimes, but a lot of times they're laying towards the bottom when they're in that resting mood, and that's typically where I want to keep my baits closer to the bottom. Now the problem is, when you are on the bottom, you can get hung up a little bit more. One thing I will also add to this right here is I throw like a 12-pound line. I want a little bit lighter line, 12 pounds, advanced fluorocarbon. I stick with like a 7-foot medium heavy action rod. You can go with a medium, and then like a 7 to 1, 7-3 to 1. You can really use about any gear ratio, because this is not really a fast technique. The fish are pretty lethargic, and this is something that overall, this is just a fish catcher, something that I learned back in Indiana, and I would catch fish all winter long. If there was open water anywhere to fish in the state of Indiana, if there's one bait that I'm gonna pick, it's gonna be a blade bait. And this guy right here is just as good as anyone out there. Now, I will say this, one thing that is tough about blade baits overall is hooks. So if you're wanting to make sure every fish that you hook, you try to get in the boat, upgrading your hooks, if you're looking for a premium hook, I'm gonna go with like the Red Line series, whether I put it in a size number 3 or a size number 5. That's sort of what I'm gonna roll with, okay? So that's enough for the actual rod, reel, line, lure. Let's talk about where on the lake we are going to fish. So if you're not fishing a pond, you're not fishing a river, where are we gonna fish? Let's jump over here to the Lowrance unit. I'm gonna talk to you guys exactly where I am going to be looking for these fish. So right here, you have a pretty big body of water. This is actually like Lanier. Lake Lanier is huge. So typically for me, there's a couple little places that I'm gonna look for if I'm on a body of water like this one right here. Let's just go in this pocket, because this sort of has a little bit of everything and whatnot. The one thing that I will say, overall, I'm gonna look for little points. Like that's a little subtle point right there. Okay, a little subtle, little turn in the point. There's more of a flatter point right there. Some of those points can be really good, but one thing that I really look for this time of year more than anything is more of the place where the contour lines get closer together, okay? So where would that be? First place I'm gonna look at in the very back, towards the back end of this creek, right here. It's a perfect little place right there. There's contours that come close together, or even like, let's step in here. This little pocket right here on this left-hand side, guess what? That's a perfect scenario. Now, what I'm gonna look for is that little push. So rather than like looking for those big giant points, the fish wanna be close to deep water. Okay, so if I am fishing the bank, I'm gonna be looking for little pushes like that guy right there. Okay, so like you see it has a push out, that's only like 13, 14 feet deep. It's harder to see. It pushes out a little bit more. It's a lot tighter down the bank right there, and it pushes out along this zone right here. And it does the exact same thing on the opposite side. So that is like what some people, that's sort of similar to like what people call like maybe a bluff end, not necessarily a bluff end for this, but that's where your contours come close together and then they go flatter. And that's a lot of times where those fish can move up and down and they have easy access from deep water. So that's a lot of times what I'm looking for in the wintertime. So jumping into bait number two. Number two for me is definitely going to be a swim bait, okay? I'm selecting a smaller swim bait because a lot of times the fish and the shad are smaller this time of year. So 3 inches long, this is a 3-inch Crush City Mare. I have multiple different colors, shad patterns for the most part. Water's a little bit cleaner, you know, green shad. I mean, gizzard shad's probably my favorite, number one. Shad's more of a clear watercolor. But one thing that I want to tell you, I wanted to show you guys this tip because this is one tip that I realize a lot of people did not understand or have not done this. Now, you might be one of those viewers that you do this all the time, but this is a swim bait saving, no matter what swim bait you're throwing, you know, a paddle tail swim bait on a jig head. This is one thing that's helped me be more efficient and save more swim baits, and that's gonna help you spend less money. Okay, so let's pop out one of these little mares right here first. Okay, an albino. And the big key, what is the key to this tip, is using a screw lock jig head. Okay, that is numero uno. Now, a lot of people, I've seen people even do this over the last couple months. They're like, oh, well, it's a screw lock. So you just go over here and you put it on and you rig it up and you put it in there and inline it and then you just mush it on there, right? You just smush it on there right there. No, don't do that. Okay, don't do that. All right, so you're literally screwing, it's a screw lock. So what do you do with a screw? You rotate it, all right? So what I will do with this jig head right here is I'm gonna go ahead and give myself a little bit of a benchmark of where it's gonna be rigged. It's coming right out ahead of that little fin right there. So I know, hey, if I go into that far, I'm gonna be good. Right ahead of that little fin towards the back. I'm gonna go in here, try to be as straight as possible. Go up there where I put that little hole. Okay, now this is the part that's really important. Just rotate it around the hook. Rotate it around the hook. One more time. 3. All right, as simple as that is, okay? That right there is the difference in catching, if you have a regular jig head, 2 bass, and this one right here, I've caught as many as 20 bass on one single swim bait. No joke. That is huge when if you were a high schooler or a college angler or any angler out there in the water, we're trying to ultimately get the most out of our baits, and that is something that does that. This one right here is the hybrid swim bait jig. This is the one I throw all the time, and it's also the same one that I throw with the freeloader. But for me, these guys right here is what I recommend on the back, utilizing that for a jig head. Now 3/16 is what I'm gonna use when it's shallower, you know, heavier quarters. 5/16 is what I'm gonna use when I'm a little bit deeper. To me, I think that a swim bait is a great bait, even in the wintertime, because they're definitely keyed in. Like, so like on a lake like Chickamauga, like where I'm at right here, this is a great place to ultimately fish. And a lot of our fish winter in like 3 to 8 feet of water. The majority, I'm not gonna say all of them, but a lot of the fish do. And so like that's where I'm gonna use that 3/16. Slower fall, slower, trying to really, you know, slowly wind that swim bait on the bottom or towards the bottom, let it fall, boom, boom, boom. Big key, whatever swim bait you decide to throw, you have to make sure it has a very consistent kicking action. And that's what is important, especially with your swim bait selection. Now, as far as rod, I do like throwing on a spinning rod, 7-foot medium. 8-pound nano braid. You guys know I love that Summix nano braid. And then I'll throw like a 10-pound or 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. And then for a reel, my favorite reel for a spinning reel is that 2500 Vanford. I swapped my handle out right here with like an old Stradic handle, like that T handle. I think they actually still make this one, so you might actually be able to buy it separately. But that to me is the best drag system in the game for the price point. It's fairly pricey, but that's the one I throw. So number 2 is done. Let's talk about where we're gonna throw this swim bait real quick before we jump onto the next bait. So really good position right here. Sort of, you can see we're in this creek arm right here, okay? We're in this creek arm. A lot of times these bottlenecks, like this guy right here, see how there's danger right there. The bottlenecks in the morning, a lot of times they'll push these shad up into this little ditch, right? This is what you call it. Okay, so a lot of times I'll stop on this point. This is a great place where they would bottleneck down, they would be able to ambush the shad and the bait balls right in the zone. So that might be the perfect scenario. So imagine if this is 20 foot of water, 100 feet of water, and it goes up into 10 foot, or if it's like, or it's like 10 feet of water going up into 2 feet. This is the scenario that I'm looking for. It does not matter. It's basically the same exact scenario every single time. You're looking for pinch points where those bass don't have to work that hard to ultimately get some shad and get some food, because they don't want to work that hard. They don't. It's wintertime, it's cold, they're not gonna do that. So those are the places that I'm gonna look for. One other thing that I will tell you, this is, I'm gonna call this how I see it. The one thing in the wintertime you have to understand, a lot of times we think bass will not sit on mud or nothing. This is the time of year they do that. They literally don't care. They will sit on the muddiest bottom on the lake and just sit there and sulk. So it's harder to target those fish, of course, but what I'm saying is typically that's also where the shad are at. A lot of times the shad are on those places, those funnels, those creek channels, those places like this, like right here in the middle of this drain. It's normally not real hard bottom in those places, and those fish will just set up in those zones on like little irregularities, but they'll be on just straight mud. So don't necessarily just casting out in the middle of the lake or casting out in the middle of the pocket. A lot of times it will catch fish. Even if you don't have forward fishing sonar, just casting out there, reeling around, you can get bites because a lot of the fish will actually sit out there in the wintertime. That's where they actually winter at. Okay, jumping to number 3 for me. Of course, you guys, all right, we're gonna slide over here first. All right, my bank beaters, okay? You guys know it. You gotta have a crankbait ready to roll, and there is none better. There's none better than a number 7 shad wrap. Now, I throw a number 5 on a spinner rod, but a number 7 is this guy right here. Is a little bit bigger. I actually throw him on a bait caster. For me, overall, with like a number 7 shad wrap, the key is tight wiggle. It's hard though, I'm gonna be honest with you. This is something you always hear this, and I mean, I've heard it a lot. Tight wiggling baits when it's cold, but then you see like baits like a wiggle wart, they catch really big fish when it's really cold. So I don't even know necessarily if that's the deal, is like that it has to be a tight wiggling bait. I just think there's certain scenarios, I think tight wiggling baits overall catch more fish consistently on day in and day out because they're more lifelike. So for me, that's why I like a shad wrap. A shad wrap just gets bites, and it does a good job of you know, generating those bites. And I feel like the only negative you have a shad wrap is they're a little bit light. They just don't cast the easiest. So a lot of times anglers throw them on a spinner rod. I'll throw them with like a 7-foot medium action on a spinner rod if I'm throwing that number 5. But if I'm throwing that number 7, this is actually my new 7-3 cranking rod. It's a select series. It'll be out here soon, but it's a little bit more, has a little bit more tip action to it right now. So like, I'll just sort of throw that crankbait out there and like, you know, really parallel a lot of these banks. So I'm looking for rock, I'm looking for like clay banks. I'm looking for those fish that are crawdad eaters, okay? So the crawfish eaters typically are the fish that I'm targeting with a crankbait. Hard bottom, rocky areas, you know, places like little turns and little points, similar to like what I showed you with, you know, throwing that blade bait, same sort of scenario, but I'm actually fishing the bank. I'm fishing the bank, I'm fishing 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot or shallower, and I'm paralleling those banks, whether it's bluff banks or whatnot. So I'm gonna show here real quick here, let's zoom out. I'm gonna show you sort of what I'm looking at. There's a little road bed right there. Okay, so here's the main channel right here, main river. We're gonna go up the main channel. We're gonna go up this main channel a little bit. You can see up the Chesapeake right here. Okay, I'm gonna slide up a little bit more. Just a little bit easier to see. Okay, so outside bends. Okay, these are creek channel bend. These are basically the outside bend, and this is like where that creek channel runs up there. And this is like what you would call a channel bank. Right here's a channel bank. This is where the channel gets tight to the bank. Those are great little places in the backs of the creeks this time of year. That's where I'm gonna focus more of my energy on with my crankbaits. Okay, the one key thing that I will tell you, if your water is still clean on your bodies of water, you can catch them throwing a crankbait on cloudy days in the clean water, and you can catch them on like first thing in the mornings. So I will throw this crankbait, even though it's a orange, it's called a crawdad, which is a shad pattern I've always laughed at. It's a shad pattern, but it's a crawdad color, and they call it crawdad, but it catches the heck out of it. It's probably the number one, like I bet you a shad wrap in that crawdad color has probably caught more bass cranking in the United States from the months of December to March than probably any other crankbait. Maybe not, but I'm pretty sure it would be up there in the top 3 if not. So those are the places I'm gonna look for. Those are the little places like, okay, that aren't as obvious as this guy right here. I might slide over here. You see, again, tighter little corners, tighter little places where that. Now, warmer days, I might slide over here to this little flatter point or these flatter banks. You have to figure it out. Warmer days, warmer water. Sometimes even in scenarios where the bass want to be on those banks, you can figure it out. But day in and day out, I'm looking for more channel bank type of stuff because that's what I like to fish. And I'm trying to get as parallel to that rock as I possibly can. You have to bump. A lot of times I feel like you have to bump that rock to ultimately get the bite. So that's important. 6/8 to 1 gear ratio on this reel. I typically throw that Corrado 150 and a 6.3. That's what I would recommend. I just have some of my old Jacob Wheeler reels left over, and I have them rigged up. So that's what I recommend there. And of course, if you guys are looking for like a replacement hook, definitely look for like whether that's your red line, I throw a number 5 on the back of it. But if you're upgrading your hooks, look for a more premium hook. Definitely, that's what I recommend. Okay, 2 more on the line. Next is going to be, hold on here. I'm about to think. Next is gonna be a jig. You guys know, I go back, okay, to be fair with it, I'm gonna tell you guys, I literally will go back and watch these videos and I wanna show you guys something different every time. So I'm gonna literally talk about different stuff every time I can and give you guys a better understanding of what's going on. And for each year, things constantly change. Some things, 3 or 4 will stay the same, 2 or 3 will stay the same, but I wanna always bring something new to you all that I feel like is gonna help you guys catch more fish. So, a jig and a pig. So now, I'm not big on the jig and pig scenario. I'm more on the jig and the chunk or a trailer. And the trailer that I'm gonna recommend is more of a craw trailer. But I'm gonna show you something that's really important. So you can buy a chunk, or I recommend buying a craw trailer. This one's like right here, this one I'm throwing in the back, it's a cleanup craw. And so I'm gonna show you what I do to it. So real quick here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm basically gonna rip this half part of this body off. So I'm gonna really make this guy more compact, okay? Because I have more of a finesse jig, okay? Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this guy on here, have a little bit bigger body, thread him on. I personally like to thread. That's what I like to do. I like to thread. I might have made him a little bit tight, but that's sort of like the scenario right there. That's what I'm looking for, tight, small profile. Now, the one thing as I rip this guy open, there are 2 flanges. There are 2 little guys right here, little flanges on each side of this leg. This is really, really important. In the wintertime, I do not want a ton of action, or I want really fast action. I want my bait to fall faster a lot of times, especially if I'm fishing in deeper water. So what I'll literally do is I'll take some scissors, and I'm just gonna rip this guy off here. I'll take some scissors and I'll cut right along. I'm doing it with my finger right here. And I'll literally take off that back flange, okay? So on that side, take that one off. I'm gonna take this guy off right here. Okay, good. Normally use scissors, but that's what I do. So what that is allowing me to do, okay, I'm gonna show you. What that allows me to do is basically what you have a cross style bait. In a crawl style bait, with this like cleanup crawl, he wants to do this, okay? But with me cutting or pinching it off at this specific time, pinching it off, now that bait wants to do this. Or just like barely moving, right? To me, that is a huge ordeal this time of year. That's what I'm looking for. That's the action I want. And I'm able to have both of those actions by just literally pinching it off or customizing your bait that you want to do. Now, green pumpkin's always great. Depending on your water clarity, you just got to figure that out. Black, blue, several different things you can do. But for me, that is the way I like to fish my jig this time of year. Now, as far as where am I going to fish this jig? So the exact same little banks that I was talking about, like little like creek channel side, like creek channel banks like this guy right here, or like bluff ends or bluff banks. That's a lot of times where I'm gonna focus my energy on, especially on the times when there's like not a lot of wind on those bodies of water, or docks. Okay, this particular map on CMAS doesn't really have all the docks, but those are what I'm gonna really look for, is those scenarios like that little outside deal, or I'm gonna look for docks inside these little pockets that have deep water close by. Again, to me, that's what I wanna look for. If you have a warm day though, I will say this, if you have a warm day, those fish will slide up in the backs of these pockets, in the backs of the creek arms on the last dock, and you can go catch a big one in the back of those pockets sometimes and catch, you know, that's one thing I've always sort of looked for, but it's typically later in the day, last couple hours, and you can generate a big bite like that. So rock, typically wood, fishing brush piles. A jig just gets bites. I can drag it around on points like this guy right here. That point's perfect, just dragging around those shallower places that have rock around them where they're eating crawfish, and that, or crayfish, crawfish, crawdads, whatever you want to call them, and that's what I'm gonna roll with. So that is number 4 on the list. Last but not least, we are going to jump into the final selection. You guys know what it is? Okay. Last one, I could not literally go into January, into a new year, and not have a jerkbait in my boat. I would try to limit, what I said is I was gonna tell myself is I'm gonna limit how many rods I'm gonna bring up. Because there's sometimes I will literally tell you guys that I'm like top 5 baits, but it'd be like 14 baits by the end of the deal. So I wanna try to limit it a little bit more. So jerkbait is definitely going to be one of my favorites. And a lot of times what a jerkbait is so good at is when it's super cold. You know, it's so interesting to me. I feel like we've learned so much over the last few years, or the last 4 or 5 years, with the jerkbait. This one right here is the Rapala Maverick, and I actually helped, this bait helped me and myself and my team win the team series event down in Florida this time of year, you know, a couple years ago. $300,000 before that. Now it's out. The cool thing about this bait right here, it's very erratic. To me, I like a very erratic jerkbait that, you know, jumps around a lot. Now this time of year though, I'm not gonna be jerking it that hard or that fast. Also, one thing that's really important to me when I get a jerkbait is having a jerkbait that suspends correctly out of the package. If your jerkbait will float out of the package, it's no bueno. You do not want to float. This is the one, if you do not want to catch any bass when the water is 50 degrees, go tie you on, well, I'm not saying any bass, but you want to diminish your chances at catching numbers of fish throughout the day, throw a floating jerkbait. It does not generate as many bites, nearly as many. The fish are lethargic, and that's why a suspending jerkbait is such a great tool this time of year. Having quality hooks is another really good important thing. These all come stocked with those red line hooks that I was talking about. So for me, and this is no BS, this is truly the best out of the package jerkbait that I have seen on the market. Period, bar none, end of story, no questions asked. Done. You pick this up, this jerkbait came out of the package that if you buy it at the store, you do nothing to it. It's ready to roll. Smaller hooks, thin hooks, ready to roll. Dialed in. Now, as far as rod, reel, line, simple to me, 12-pound line is my preference. 12-pound Suffolk Advanced Fluorocarbon, 6/8 to 1 to a 7/3 to 1 gear ratio reel. So 6/3 to 1 to 7/3 to 1. DC loves the 6/3 to 1. I'm more on the 7/3, I'm more in the middle. I can throw an 8/3, but you have to slow down, okay? Another thing that I actually sort of want to bring up that's really interesting to me is there was a tournament, and it sort of was like the front end of like how I'm not gonna say the front, this is pre-forward facing sonar. So there was a tournament back in the day where Brian Thrift won the tournament on Beaver Lake. Matt Airy was catching these fish. Water was like low 40s or like mid 40s, something like that. Super cold. Brian Thrift wins the tournament. Matt Airy was rooming with Brian Thrift. Matt Airy was catching his fish, throwing a jerkbait really, really fast. And so what ended up transpiring was the fish were following the jerkbait. They've seen so many jerkbaits, and Matt Airy was making them react to it. They were actually reacting to it faster, and they were up there looking at the bait more than we thought they were. So Brian Thrift changes his cadence in the next 2 days and wins the tournament just by the retrieve and ultimately the action and how he retrieved his jerkbait. That and the cadence of his jerkbait. That right there, if that does not tell you something about jerkbait bass fishing, I don't know what will. The key, number one key in jerkbait bass fishing is the cadence. If you cannot get a cadence that works for you and adjust the cadence accordingly to the conditions, that is the number one thing. Once you figure that out, you can generate bites around the lake. I remember a time, there's so many times. I remember a time back in the day where my buddy Brian Johnson, we caught 30 pounds on a lake in Indiana, throwing a jerkbait. And he'd throw it out there and he was reeling it down there and he was go tap, tap, tap. And he caught 3 6-pounders or 2 6-pounders before I had one on the boat. And then I started rolling with his cadence. I started mimicking his cadence and I caught another 6-pounder. And then we caught another one. So cadence is everything. Pay attention to when you get your bites. That's really important. And that's what I recommend. Now, as far as where I'm going to throw this jerkbait, a lot of the same stuff. Now, I will throw a jerkbait on flatter stuff. So flatter points, flatter places. But I still want right here in this scenario, okay, I still want a little bit of deep water right there. So there's that deep water. I might throw it up on top of that point. I might throw him out here along this little deal right here. If the water's cleaner, the one thing I will say is we don't realize how good bass how well they see. They can visually see really, really well. Maybe not like a foot of vision, more than you think. So I'm looking for those little places, like those little points. That's more of like what a bluff end actually looks like right there. Sorry, if you guys are still with me at this point in time, that is more so what like a bluff end sort of looks like right there. You have a steeper bank. Might not be a bluff end, but that's sort of like a transition into similar. I'm not gonna say it's a bluff end, but it's really close to more of that bluffy end style deal. Super steep right there, point. Those are like almost guarantees in generating bites in the wintertime. So that is the last of the top 5. I will say this real quick here. If you guys are looking for all of these items that I'm using, will be in the description below. I want you guys to know, like, hey, I'm trying to give you guys more of a better experience, try to ultimately, hopefully learn a little bit more in this video, and I'm also going to allow you guys to sort of have a breakdown of what rod I'm using, line, all that good stuff in the description below. As always, good luck out there, good fishing, and we will see you on the next one.